and welcome back to Tell Me Your Ghost Story. I'm your host, Cassie Askin, and today we hear Sheila's stories. Sheila has some very special stories that she was kind enough to share with us. She's an amazing storyteller, and listening to her stories, I felt like I was at a family reunion hearing special, sacred family stories. Her stories are somehow both heartwarming and terrifying at the same time. So without any further ado, let's get to Sheila's stories. Hi, Sheila. Tell me your ghost story.
When I was a kid, I grew up in the state of Arkansas. My family moved around a little bit. I was actually born in Northwest Arkansas, and then my family moved back and forth between there and Northeastern Arkansas. But they started out in Central Arkansas in Little Rock, and that's where this story originated. It was something that my dad experienced back when he started in law enforcement, when he started as a policeman in Little Rock, Arkansas. So the time frame was around 1967, 1968. So he started out doing patrol one night, and they had a vacant house that was in an area of Little Rock, which I later was able to find out it was called the Heights. And it was a big mansion like home. It had a circular driveway and it was gated. And so he was doing his patrol one night. Since the house was vacant, they were checking it just to make sure that there was not any vandalism or anything like that that took place. And he pulled into the driveway one night. And as he did, he saw a light come on in the attic window, which he thought was strange right away because the house was vacant. But as soon as that happened, all of the power on his car just died. So he just lost everything. And he had to coast back out onto the roadway. And then as soon as he did, he said everything just came back on. So he thought that was strange, but not really thinking a whole lot of it at the time. So he did the same thing. He pulled back into the driveway. Again, he saw the light come on in the attic. And same thing happened. Everything shut off in the car. So he coasted back down onto the roadway. And at that point, he decided he would call in to dispatch and see if something was, if he was doing something wrong or if there was something wrong with his car or something else. And when he did, the person he got a hold of at dispatch asked him right away, which way did you pull into the driveway? And he told them which direction. And they said, okay, yeah, that's the problem. You need to back out, pull into the driveway the other way. And for whatever reason, you'll be okay. And he thought that was really strange at the time, but he did that and he pulled back into the driveway the other direction and everything was working. And he was able to pull up his spotlight and run the spotlight across the house. And as he did, and as he ran it across the attic window, that's when he saw that the curtains were pulled back in the window and he saw this figure staring at him. And it startled him right away because it didn't look human when he saw it. The eyes were real large, distorted. The whole face was just very creature like. I mean, he immediately knew that that could not be human. Then the figure disappeared and he called back in to dispatch and he got out and looked around the house, checked doors were locked, there had not been anyone living in the house. So they just told him to come back to the station. It was probably just, he just caught something, maybe out of the corner of his eye, but it really startled him. And it stuck with him enough that when he got home that night, he started telling my mom the story and sharing it with her. And she just, thought, wow, that is so crazy. And she asked him if he would take her back out there a couple nights later. And of course, he was excited about that because the thing with my dad was that he started having experiences as early as a teenager. And one thing it intrigued him. So anytime he would see something like that, he was immediately in an investigative mode and he just wanted to see if he could replicate it or understand what was happening or just, have the confirmation that it was something outside of this world or spiritual or paranormal or something like that. So my mom said she did go with him. They went back out to the house, but she was so scared she didn't even let him pull in the driveway. She said it was just so creepy, the house itself. And so she did not get to experience any of that, but she could tell just he was very convicted in what he had seen. And then what was interesting was then years later, in probably the mid to late 1970s, we were all sitting around together as a family. And this old Twilight Zone episode had come on. And he said he had probably seen it before, but really hadn't paid much attention. And it was the episode where William Shatner played this man who was on this airplane. And he had gone through like some mental issues and had just gotten out of, I think, a mental institution or something like that. So, of course, no one was believing him when he started seeing this creature out on the wing. And this creature was like pulling parts of the wing apart. And the creature itself, I mean, at the time, of course, we thought it was the scariest thing ever. In today's time, the costume does not look that creepy. It doesn't look realistic, but it wasn't the full body. Well, it was when the creature was right in the window and William Shatner turned around and the creature was just right there. It was really just from his face and upper body. And that's when my dad sat up in the chair and he said, "Oh my goodness, that's it. That's the creature. That's the face that I saw." And then he goes on to tell us, me and my siblings, the story of what happened to him when he was in patrol back in Little Rock and pulled up to this house. And he said he had never seen that face before that or after that. So he was just completely just, I mean, the look on his face when he sat up, we knew that he had seen this face before. And it was very interesting that they were able to capture something that close to what he had seen. And so, yeah, it was a story that was one that definitely stuck with all of us through the years. And then he was very open with telling his stories of things that he had experiences and encounters. So one that I still remember very specifically also was one of the times that we lived over in Northwest Arkansas, and he was working. It was one of his part-time jobs because he was in law enforcement my entire life before he passed away in 1987, but he always had side jobs as well. So he was actually running a forklift in a warehouse, and he was fairly new there when this incident happened, but he was out in the warehouse and driving his forklift and unloading pallets off of trucks and then taking them into the warehouse and stacking them at certain locations. So he had this experience where he was doing that and he was almost finished. He had one last pallet load left to put on the top level of this stack that he had created. And he was raising up the forklift and he looked up on top of the stack of pallets that he already had put there and he saw this man standing there. And, he thought, well, this is weird. Why is he standing up there? So he started trying to yell at him, over the noise of the warehouse and the machines and stuff. And he was like waving at him and saying, you've got to get down from there. I need to finish stacking this. And the figure just stood there. And he thought, well, this is so strange. And still being so fairly new, he thought, well, maybe there's something else going on. So he got off the forklift and went to the office to talk to his manager. So when he gets down to the office to talk to the manager is looking at him kind of like he knows a little bit of what might be happening. And he's asking him specific questions on where was he at in the warehouse, like what was the product he was moving, what was he doing when this was happening. And so he goes through the whole scenario of what he's been doing. And he said, this is the last pallet that I have to put on this stack. And the manager then asked him, he said, so this person that you saw, what did he look like? And my dad goes on to describe him. I mean, from head to toe, he could see him very clearly. He told him, the clothes he was wearing, the hair, everything about this figure. And his manager said, okay. He said, so what I want you to do is go back down, and I want you to don't put that palette on. I want you to remove all of the other palettes, and then I want you to restack them. And he told him a specific way. And he said, oh, okay, I hadn't I hadn't thought of doing it that way, but okay, I'll go back down and I'll redo it. And he said, but I don't understand. He said, so who was this guy? And he said, well, years ago, there was an accident that happened here. There was a guy that had been stacking pallets. And when he got to the last pallet load, the weight had shifted because of the way he had loaded them or stacked them. And it shifted and it fell over onto him and the forklift. And he actually didn't survive the accident. He was trapped in the forklift. So that immediately told my dad that he felt like that this guy had shown up, knowing that, he had been able to see things like that before, and was very aware of things like that, and had probably saved his life that day. So he went back down and he pulled down all of those pallets. He redid them the other direction, restacked them, and never saw the guy again while he was working there. So yeah, but my dad he had so many different things. So his very first experience that he remembered ever happening, he was a teenager and he was asleep in his room one night, and he woke up to one of his uncles standing at the foot of his bed. And he, raised up and he started talking to his uncle, and his uncle was telling him things like different messages, different things to tell his aunt, and just a whole conversation that they had. At one point thought, I've got to be dreaming. There's no way my uncle is standing at the foot of my bed. This is so wild. So anyway, eventually his uncle just kind of disappeared. And my dad just went back to sleep. He thought that had to be a dream. There's no way. So he drifted back to sleep, and early in the morning, he started hearing commotion out in the living room, and he made his way out there, and people were crying. And there was, something had happened. He knew something had happened. And when he finally was able to understand what was happening, his uncle had been killed in an airplane accident earlier that night. His aunt was there at the house, giving the news to them. And of course, his mom was, consoling her and everything. And just everyone was just devastated. And he was sitting there thinking, yeah, I think I need to tell you some things. And he went on to tell his aunt some of the things that his uncle had told him the night before, to share with her. That was his first experience. And after that, he said it just almost felt like very natural when things would happen to him after that. And then as a kid, I had experiences. One that was very clear was waking up in the middle of the night one night, and I thought my mom was in the room asking me to get up and get dressed for school. And I remember thinking, it's still very dark in here. And I also remember being a sleepwalker and sleep talker. So I, looking back, thought, oh, maybe it was something like that. But it was so vivid and real that I can still, I'm 54 years old. I can still remember, and I was about 10 at the time. But I went into the living room. I sat down. I could see the light coming through the curtains behind the couch. I could see the curved parts at the top of the couch and everything. And this woman was standing there talking to me. And the whole time I kept thinking that it was my mom. And then eventually she just kind of faded away. And I realized that no one else was up in the house. And I even went through and kind of checking out to see who was, no, everyone was asleep. And I went back to bed. I kept my school clothes on, but I went back to bed. And I remember asking my mom when she came in the next morning if she had already been in there to wake me up once already that night or that morning. And she said, no, no, she hadn't. And she was trying to figure out why I was in my clothes. And then from there, I don't really remember anything until my son was born. And then I had an experience after that. So our son was about 2 to 3 years old. So he was sleeping in a twin size bed at the time. The house that me and my husband had at the time, we had propane heat. And sometimes, because we didn't have a whole lot of money, sometimes the propane would run out in the tank. And this was a real, cold part of winter. So we had space heaters sitting in our bedrooms. And I remember at that time frame, I had a space heater set up not too far from my son's bed that night when we went to bed. I was just laying there asleep in a pretty deep sleep. And the next thing I know, something just startled me awake. And I opened my eyes, and standing in front of me was this outline of a woman. And it was like a bluish purple glow that was around her all the way from her head down. So I could make out it looked like her hair had a bun on top, and it looked like she was wearing like spectacles. I could see like down to almost like her dress, and it was like long, and it looked like her hands were kind of in front of her. And I was just looking at her like, this cannot be happening. And the longer I stared, it was almost like the clearer she got. And it just startled me. I started just pushing my way back across the bed, and I was just slapping my husband and going, wake up, wake up, wake up. And just as he went to roll over, she just vanished. And he rolled over, and he looked up, and he said, "There's nothing there. There's no one over there. I don't know what you're talking about." And I said, "Oh my gosh, the woman, you don't see that woman standing there? She's so clear." And he said, "I don't see anything." And he said, "You must be dreaming. Maybe you're just dreaming something, and you just woke up and you were still seeing it." And keeping in mind that this was the first time throughout our marriage, me and my husband now have been married for 35 years. And this was the first time, but not the last, that I woke him up like that. He was not sure what to think, but he ended up talking me into going back to sleep. So I remember rolling back over and getting real close to him and pulling the cover up as high as I could on my head and trying to doze back off. And just as I felt like I felt something rubbing across the top of my head. And I immediately just threw the cover back, and I jumped up, and I thought, she's trying to tell me something. That's just all I could think. She's trying to tell me something. And in a flash, I remembered, I immediately went back to being a child in a time when me and my sister had a fan that caught on fire at the end of our bed. And my dad ran into the bedroom at the last minute because something had woke him up, and he was able to put the fire out on the fan. So immediately I thought, the space heater, and so I ran to my son's bedroom. I couldn't get there fast enough. And he was fine. He was laying there just asleep, and the space heater was just going. Everything was fine, but I could not shake it. And so I unplugged the space heater. I gave him extra blankets, and I just felt like that's what I needed to do. I walked around the rest of the house, which was very unlike me to even do that. And I checked all the doors and windows and everything. Everything was fine. I went back to bed, didn't immediately go back to sleep. Eventually I dozed off. And then the next morning, I remember just thinking about it and how vivid and clear it was. But we lived in that house for 10 years, and I never saw her again while we lived there. From that house, my husband and I, we have a son and a daughter. Our son, at this time, our son was about 10 and our daughter was about 5. We moved into another house in town. And this house, ironically, was just a few houses down from a house that I lived in as a child too. So over the course of, we lived there about 3.5 years. We had just some very strange things that were happening. We had this stereo that we had gotten years before, so we moved it with us to this house. And so this had never happened to us before, but we had it sitting in the upstairs living room. And several, no, I would say probably a good half dozen or more times during the time we lived there, randomly that stereo would just come on and just play. And it would, I mean, the middle of the night, we would be, because our bedroom was just right around the corner. And we would just get startled awake at this blaring music from this stereo in the living room. And we just thought, what in the world is that? And we would run in there and turn the stereo off, and we just couldn't figure out what was going on. It had a remote control on it. So my husband always said, oh, somebody else in the neighborhood must have this. Well, after so many times, I am out on the front porch, I'm walking around the house with this remote control trying to get the stereo to come on, trying to debunk it as much as I can, and I can't get it to. It just, I could never get it to work that way. But just randomly, I remember being in the kitchen one day. I was in there washing dishes, and the kids were playing outside, and stereo in the living room just came on and started playing music. And I went in there, and it's certain times it would happen, and I would unplug it, and then it would come on, and it was always plugged back in. And what was really odd about it was our kids didn't listen to the stereo. It was really just mainly for us, just to have music playing here and there while we were upstairs. And then one morning, after we had lived there about a year or two, I was upstairs in the kitchen getting breakfast ready, and our daughter came upstairs, and I would say she was probably around maybe 6 or 7 at this time. And she just had this look on her face. And I said, are you okay? What happened? And she said, last night, while her and her brother were downstairs, they were watching TV, and that she had fallen asleep in this little rocker recliner that we had downstairs, and it would turn around. And she had fallen asleep in it. And she woke up because she could feel the rocking chair of it moving. And as she opened her eyes, she saw this outline vision of this woman walking away from her. And the rest of the room was dark. And she watched her just walk towards her bedroom. And when she reached her bedroom door, she disappeared. And so she sat up in the chair, she looked around, and she realized that our son had already gone to bed. And so she ran into his bedroom and she jumped up with him in the bed, and she said, please let me stay here tonight. Please let me stay here tonight. And he was like, okay, whatever, and he was asleep. So that's where she woke up, was in his bed. And she waited until daylight, to come upstairs to tell me. And I said, well, why didn't you come upstairs and let me know? And she goes, oh no, oh no, that was as far as she was going. So she laid there the whole night, though she could not sleep, because this woman had, what she thought had walked into her bedroom. The funny thing was, the people before us, they had purchased it, but just to rent it. And over the years, they couldn't keep renters in the house and decided to go ahead and sell it. And then we bought it, and we were there 3.5 years. And, we had so many different experiences of hearing people walk up behind us and turn, and no one was there. And, just we did so much remodeling, though, that I wonder if that might have stirred some more stuff up too, because you hear about that too in the paranormal world. So we did that. And then the very last thing that happened there, we had completely cleaned the house top to bottom. We were getting ready to leave, and something caught my eye at the edge of the bar, underneath the bar. And it was right by the sliding patio doors. So why we would have never seen this before. I mean, 3.5 years. And it was white painted walls, but there was something like sticking out from the bar. And I went down there and I pulled it out, and it was a school picture of a little girl from like the 70s or 80s. So thought that was interesting too. And I thought, wait, we've lived here this long and I've never seen that little school picture. And it was made out to her aunt and uncle on the back. So, I think at that time, I think I might have just pulled it out and maybe laid it across the bar, because I think I felt odd taking it, because I thought it, it should stay here. And then oddly too, the people who bought the house from us, they weren't there, but maybe about a year. And then it was empty. Like it was empty for a long time. They didn't even have it listed for sale because we would drive back by just to take a look at it and see what was happening in the area. But in this house that I'm in right now, we are the first owners of this house. We had it built after our son had left to go into the Air Force, and it was just our daughter here with us. And so we had lived at another place prior to for about 7.5 years. Again, there was some history and some stuff there too, but that was on 15 acres and it was just too much for us to handle and take care of once he, had moved out and our daughter started activities in high school. So we bought this lot in town. We're in a little small town here in Northwest Arkansas. The house is brand new. So any history that would be here wouldn't be in the property itself, I guess. So, yeah, in this house here, there was one night that my husband and I were asleep, and I woke up and I saw this man standing at the foot of the bed, very clear. I can even remember his shirt was like plaid with like yellow and tan plaid, and he was wearing a ball cap and an older man. The sleeves were buttoned at the wrist, but I could see it looked like older hands that were like holding on to our footboard. And it was so clear that I really thought there was a man actually standing at the foot of our bed. So I just started just slapping my husband, trying to get him awake. And he rolled over and he looked and he said, "There's not anybody there. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything." And he goes, just there's nothing there. Just go back to sleep. And again, I've been doing this for so long. It really, in fact, I guess after this one was probably one of my last times I finally stopped waking him up because I just realized if I just wait, they'll go away. So, so he was standing there at the foot of the bed and he never faded. Like even when my husband turned over, he was there. And I just remember I was just laying there, just staring at this man until eventually he did kind of start to fade away. And I was laying there and I didn't feel scared or anything. I just, of course, startled from seeing somebody right away. But then I just laid back and as I started to kind of go to sleep, I could hear not externally hear a voice, but almost like in my mind, I could hear a voice and I could hear the words of, "Please tell her that I am so sorry that I wasn't there for her all of those years. Please let her know that I never stopped thinking about her and that I missed her, missed seeing her grow up. And I'm so sorry for all the things that I did. And then for not being there for her was the last thing." And I kind of opened my eyes because I thought like that legitimately sounded like a voice. But no one else was there. He was gone. And I didn't think really much about it after that. But I do remember it was a long weekend, holiday weekend. So when I got back to the office on Tuesday, one of my good friends that I worked with, we all started kind of rehashing, "Oh, what did you guys do this weekend?" And she said, "Well, I got some really strange news this weekend." And we said, "Why? Well, what happened?" And she said, "Well, my sister called and found out that our dad passed away this weekend. And she hadn't seen her dad since she was a little girl when her parents divorced. And it was a really bad situation between her parents. And I think he carried a lot of shame and guilt. And he really, I guess at that time you would say, deserted them. So she never had a relationship with him. She saw him once or twice when she was an adult, but she never really could, rekindle anything. She lost her mom years before also. And so just the pain of that and feeling like her mom had really, had a broken heart and she just never was able to forgive him. And I said, "Oh, what did your dad look like?" And she said, well, she started to kind of describe him. And I said, well, do you have any pictures of him? And she said, well, I do actually have this one on my phone that my sister sent me years ago. Let me see if I still have it. And she pulls up this picture, and I am about to fall over because she shows me this picture of this older man sitting in this lawn chair. He's got like khaki pants on, a long plaid button up shirt. He's got a ball cap on, and they're fishing. He's fishing, and he's got a fishing pole in his hands. And she said, yeah, she said that was, years ago that this was taken. And she said, why? Why do you ask? And I said, I think I have a message that I need to tell you. And I did. I told her what I had seen, what he had said, or what I thought he had said, and the message. And she started to cry, and I started to cry, and it was very emotional. But that was the time that I realized I needed to start just staying calm and just letting things happen and listening and kind of trying to figure out who they were, what it meant. I don't typically know them. I have sometimes tried to make them fit into someone that I think maybe they're not familiar enough. But strangely, because my dad had had so many experiences throughout his lifetime, he ended up having pancreatic cancer, and he spent, probably about 2 months in the hospital. And we didn't know at that time that it was pancreatic cancer. And the weekend before he came home and then had to be rushed back to the hospital and eventually passed away from the exploratory surgery, the reason he decided to come home that weekend was he woke up in the middle of the night and saw a man standing at the foot of his bed. And as this man, he thought it was maybe a doctor or someone from the hospital staff. And as this person started to walk closer to him, he realized that it was him, and it was a younger version of him. And then he realized that he was not going to make it. So he kind of saw that he needed to just go home. And he spent that weekend. They called in family, and his brothers and sisters all came in to see him. And it was the last time that most of them saw him before he passed away. He was rushed back in to the hospital Sunday night, and then Tuesday morning in exploratory surgery, they took him in, and he passed away there. So yeah, he just knew that he wanted to be home. There were, as we were growing up, because my dad did believe, so much, so strongly about spirits and ghosts and unexplainable phenomenon like that. He always told us, because I would be scared, I don't want to see a ghost. I don't want anything like that to happen. And he always told us, he said, there's always two things to remember. You'll never see a ghost unless you believe that you will. And then he said the other thing is, ghosts will not hurt you, but they can cause you to hurt yourself. So you have to stay calm if and when you do see something. So he was also giving us pointers, I guess, like for things to come. But out of our family, I think I'm the only one. I have a sister, and who's 3 years older than me. I don't know that she's ever, had any experiences. My mom's had some, of some strange things, presence of people that have passed, that she has felt nearby, and things. But, yeah, I guess I got lucky, and I got the overflow once he passed. It's like, well, if we can't go see him anymore, let's go visit her.
If you didn't immediately go look up that Twilight Zone monster, you are absolutely required to go look it up now. The episode is called Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. You can find photos of it along with more photos from the show on the Tell Me Your Ghost Story Instagram at Tell Me Your Ghost Story Podcast. You can also find Sheila on TikTok. Her handle is at Carter_she, and there you can find her sharing more stories she's collected through the years. Please like, rate, review, subscribe, follow the pod wherever you consume it. If you're listening to audio only, there's video accompaniment over on YouTube, and we got some fun stuff up on TikTok at Tell Me Your Ghost Story Pod. If you have a true paranormal story you'd like to share, please email it to tellmeyourghoststorypodcast at gmail.com. Until next week, my friends, good night to all, and to all a good night. Bye!